Yeah, thank you very much. To essentially continue my presentation, I will move into the human sector more and in terms of where we see the challenges in implementation. And this is important, but let me start with, again, emphasizing that we not only need to consider impacts of climate change, but if we take measures, these may have their own impacts. So impacts of adaptation and mitigation measures should be considered, the trade-offs in those choices. And certainly when considering those trade-offs, it comes back once again, that the best way forward would be to cut back on emissions strongly, because we expect co-benefits for human health and adaptation. That follows logically from what I've said before the coffee break. We will have reduced competition for land, for example, in terms of less need for the use of bioenergy and carbon capture and storage. We will have benefits for food security for humankind. We can exploit the capacity of ecosystems more to help us with carbon storage and biodiversity conservation. So ecosystem restoration should be a big part of our planning. And we should certainly, keeping all of these benefits in mind, also move into other management strategies in addition to considering climate change, and that is eliminating the non-sustainable use of land, moving into land degradation, neutrality as it is called. For example, this depends on the integration of multiple responses across local, regional, and national scales, considering multiple sectors, including agriculture, pasture, forest, and water. So climate change strategies do not stand alone. They have to be combined with other management strategies, and here it's so-called sustainable land management, which should also focus on the restoration and rehabilitation of degraded land. We have lost some land already for human food production. This will then also help to eradicate poverty and ensure food security, as well as contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation. So sustainable land management is a core issue, and better land and ocean management will actually maintain the natural resources that we have available to us. Combined with ambitious mitigation, this would support biodiversity conservation and would support food security for humankind. We cannot see any of these aspects in isolation. They are interdependent. And one key result from the 1.5 report was actually to emphasize that ambitious climate mitigation and keeping global warming to 1.5 would facilitate reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have all these great tools and great targets put in place during recent years, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, the Paris Agreement. The targets are there, but we are challenged by the implementation. And this is a major hurdle that needs to be overcome. We need to keep in mind certainly the synergies between mitigation and adaptation technologies with respect to each of those targets. I cannot go into detail for that. But let's talk about the implementations and where are the societal challenges that we need to consider. Currently, we certainly have, on a global scale, the issue that people with the highest exposure and vulnerability are often those with the lowest capacity to respond and to adapt. They need to be helped. The temporal scales of climate change impacts and their societal consequences operate on time horizons, and that is another key challenge, which are longer than those of governance arrangements. So governance arrangements, and you can turn that around, find it difficult to consider these long-term perspectives. And the planning cycles, public and corporate decision-making cycles, and financial instruments are not usually developed with things and considering things that are at the horizon. Governance arrangements, for example, in this case, marine protected areas, spatial plans, and water management systems are too fragmented across administrative boundaries. We need cooperation across sectors and elements, and we need integrated responses to fully take the complexity of the challenges into account. And when we said this and phrased this for polar and ocean reasons, that the capacity of governance systems is actually to respond to climate change has strengthened, yes, in response to awareness, but it's not yet sufficiently rapid or robust to adequately address the scale of increasing projected risks. I think this can be generalized beyond ocean and cryosphere, and probably is true for the land sector and for cities as well. So finding solutions is the important issue. And just to remind you, there's climate change, there's biodiversity conservation, there's sustainable land management, and sustainable ocean management needed. These 4 pillars need to be considered. What can we do? On both land and oceans, we can build networks of protected areas to reduce the loss of biodiversity which is kicking in. Just to remind you, we're talking about entering the 6th mass extinction event on the planet. And enable future ecosystem-based adaptation options, facilitating the poleward movement of species, because climate change is happening, the movement is happening, and there will be new populations and ecosystems set up in different places. The planet is changing. Marine habitat restoration needs to happen, marine and terrestrial habitat restoration, we can pretty much say. And ecosystem management tools such as assisted species relocation and coral gardening can be locally effective. But there is, and this may be a little bit illusionary, there is to be considered that these options may be ineffective if global warming exceeds 1.5, just because of the biological focus on a specific temperature range. Life of this planet is dependent on keeping to amenable and keeping to temperatures that are amenable to life, including our own life. Strengthening precautionary approaches such as rebuilding overexploited or depleted fisheries. Overfishing is certainly an issue in this area as well. And responsiveness of existing fisheries management strategies reduce negative climate change impacts on fisheries with benefits for regional economies and livelihoods. Again, management of the resources in the context of ambitious climate change mitigation would work. But this is the present situation. And this concerns many of us. And I think it concerns every individual in the room, including ourselves during a certain part of our life. We are in this situation, we like to ignore what's coming and what's evolving. We need to overcome this inertia, not to go too fast. We need to overcome political paralysis that is so focused on the short term and the inaction in transformation. And this comes and brings us to feasibility, to the question of feasibility. What can we do? And actually, if you step back and look at it in a global and at a global level, what we can say is keeping warming to 1.5 is possible according to the laws of physics and chemistry, keeping in mind how the systems respond to CO2 and that this is anthropogenic, human-made. We have it. The future is in our hands. We can make the appropriate decisions. Do we have the technologies available to support mitigation and adaptation measures? Yes, we do. We may not have them at scale, and we may need new ones here and there, but the principles and how to approach this are there. These are opportunities also for businesses and investments. We would, however, need a redirection of financial flows. And this is a major hurdle at the moment. The European Union, for example, has set the target that we should phase out fossil fuel subsidies by 2025. I'm wondering whether they are really getting there. So this is the direction of financial flows is certainly something very important for the banking sector. Where do investments go? institutions we have, we may develop them, need to develop them further to consider the long-term challenges. And the question is, with all these yeses, where is the bottleneck? And clearly the bottleneck is informed policy leading and directing societal transformation. So building of societal will and political will, and both of them together at the same time, that is where the current challenges are. And I'm happy to say that there is hope. Because if you see how the global society and community has responded to the 1.5 report and the societal mobilization that has happened, especially among the young generation, gives us hope that this mobilization will also push policy along. Because especially in democracies, policymakers like to respond to what the majority of the voters think. So this coordinated development of societal and policy will is important. And to conclude, there are these key messages to be kept in mind. For minimizing impacts and associated risks, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, each choice matters, and political and societal will matters. And with that, I can say, the more decisively and earlier we act, the more able we will be to address unavoidable changes, manage risks, improve our lives, and achieve sustainability for ecosystems and people around the world, today and in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.